I started volunteering with TED about 6 years ago. Initially, I started off helping with logistics, but nowadays my role is in helping speakers get ready to speak on this little red dot. You know, the kind of speakers who look like they woke up this morning, ready to wow the world with ease, and who are speaking to you like they're just having a conversation, even though there are 400 sets of eyes and 3 cameras staring straight at them. Not to mention that their talk is going to live forever on the internet. Now, I have a bit of a confession. I'm not really here to share an idea, which is what TED and TEDx are all about. I'm here to tell you the answer to the question that I get asked most regularly when people find out about my involvement here. How do they get such great speakers? Everyone is so brilliant. Now, before I answer that question, I need to speak to you a little bit about what the difference between TED and TEDx is. So TED is the big global organization. They have all these rules and guidelines about what TEDx event organizers can and can't do. Things like the font of the logo behind me and the Pantone color in your program. The head of TED is a guy named Chris Anderson. We don't have much hierarchy here, so I hope you won't mind if I call him Chris. But he has set a whole lot of guidelines about what we can and can't speak about on the stage. Things like pseudoscience. We're not allowed to talk about anything that hasn't been thoroughly researched. We're not allowed to try and sell you anything. So you can be pretty sure that your rands and cents are safe in your pocket. We're also not allowed to talk about politics or religion. So none of the speakers up here are going to try and persuade you to believe anything that you don't already believe. Chris kind of goes through the fact in one of his TED Talks that there is no formula for a magic TED Talk. There's no start with a childhood story and end off with a massive call to action that everyone gets up in the room and they go out into the world. He speaks about the fact that ideas are the core to any TED Talk, right? And then he talks about why ideas are important. So what he says is that if communicated properly, ideas are capable of changing forever how someone thinks about the world and shapes their actions both now and well into the future. I remember my first TED Talk. It taught me that I had been tying my shoelaces wrong my whole life. Every single time I tie my shoelaces now, I think about that talk. TED has changed my world, and I know that some of these talks may change yours. So as someone who has drunk a lot of the TED Kool-Aid, I completely agree with Chris. If communicated properly, ideas are capable of changing how someone thinks about the world. Ideas are capable of changing their actions both now and well into the future. Over the last 6 years, I've had the privilege of working with some incredible speakers with amazing ideas. Ideas ranging from diagnosing rheumatic heart disease with a cell phone and an egg cup to colonizing Mars. Ideas across the board that are going to change the world. So if all the ideas are different, then maybe it's the if communicated properly part that speaks to why there is magic in the room. I'm not the first person to speak about how to communicate well. Aristotle, in 350 BC, was the first person who stood up and said, there's a great way to communicate properly. You need to do 3 things. Except he said them in ancient Greek, and I don't speak ancient Greek, so I'm going to shift those to being in English, and a little bit more relevant to the TEDx stage. So those 3 things are, be authentic, be accurate, and be accessible. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories of my experience in the TEDx community, which will highlight how we help people on this stage be a little bit more authentic, accurate, and accessible. A little while back, I worked with a doctor. He had decided to take a break from practicing medicine after an experience that he had in the mountains of Pakistan. His idea was that he had created an app that helped medical professionals decide basically in which order to treat people in medical emergencies. So you put all the information into the app, and it comes out whether or not the person needs immediate treatment or whether they can wait a little while. It's an amazing piece of technology that has saved thousands of lives around the world. So when we were practicing his speech, he disclosed to me the reason that he'd taken a pause from his medical career. It was a deeply personal story, and he was pretty confident he wasn't going to be sharing it on stage. Now, on the stage, sometimes it's important that you share the authentic reason for starting your idea. That's why people buy into it, when they know what your reason behind your idea is. So over time, we got him to be brave and to share his story. of being in the mountains of Pakistan in a medical emergency. Someone walked in with a stomach ache, and he and his team took one look and were like, no, it's a stomach ache, she'll be fine. Unfortunately, they were wrong, and she passed away waiting for treatment. What we did to help him be authentic was allow him to pause after that story. He stopped for 5 seconds, replicating his life experience of taking a pause from his medical career. 5 seconds of the most powerful silence I have ever heard on this TED stage. Authenticity is a big buzzword at the moment, and it's really about showing up and allowing people to see you for who you are, with your vulnerabilities and what you believe your imperfections are. As I said earlier, a lot of ideas are birthed from what is considered to be a low point, and sharing that with people really makes them buy into what's going on for you. My next experience with accuracy was one of my most jarring experiences working with TEDx. I was working with a youth speaker who was speaking about the fact that women in South Africa are more likely to be a grim statistic than anyone else. Statistics were a big part of her talk. And one of the things that she said was that 59% of women in South Africa at some stage will report being a victim of domestic violence. 59%. To me, living a pretty privileged life, that seemed way too high. So I did my research, and unfortunately, I was wrong. She was right. That statistic was the reason that she had decided to get up onto the TED stage and say something. That was her reason for her idea. Now, accuracy is important because it's the one place where people can just Google, find a hole in your idea, and then everything else that you say lacks a little bit of credibility. So making sure that things are absolutely right on stage is an important part of coaching a speaker. It's definitely one of the fun parts of coaching experts, because you have to do research into their topic, which they know obviously a whole lot more than any of us coaches do. Speaking of experts, this is Jill Farrant. She's a professor of molecular biology at UCT. Often on the stage, we have people who know a lot about their topic, real experts, professors, doctors, people who have studied their topic for 20 or 30 or 40 years. Now, how do you help that person make their idea accessible for someone like myself who has never heard of most of what they're talking about? Jill, as I said, is a professor at the University of Cape Town. She is involved with a study that is helping create plants that survive drought. Basically, she has worked out how to switch on and off genes in plants that allows them to hibernate when they have no water and come alive again within 24 to 48 hours after there's rain or irrigation. It's an incredible piece of work, and it's probably going to save the world when it comes to us becoming a whole lot more arid. Now, Jill arrived at her talk and basically went through her research with us, listing the 6 names of the Latin grasses that she was working with, right? Now, I don't know about you guys, but the 6 Latin names of grasses is a whole lot of new information for me, all at the same time. And my brain kind of froze. What we did with Jill is we helped her to make her talk a whole lot more accessible. We dropped all the Latin names, and instead she literally showed us pictures of what the work is that she did, so that we could understand how she switched genes on and off, and what she was going to do with her research. I get goosebumps when I think of Jill's success. Not only has she been voted Woman Scientist of the Year globally, she has also been flown around the world to share her idea, and also made it onto the TED Global stage. Now, naturally, that is far more to do with her idea than her TED talk, but in speaking with her, she credits this experience as giving her the opportunity to make her talk a whole lot more accessible, so that she has opportunity to speak to people who don't understand, who've offered her funding, who want to work with her. Accessibility is so important in the TED context that they make all the speakers sit in the audience both before and after their talk, so you have the opportunity to speak to any of these people and ask them more questions about their work. TED and TEDx basically attract passionate speakers with a huge spirit of generosity. They choose to get over their fear of public speaking, their fear of failure, to stand here in front of an audience and to share their idea with the world. This doesn't just happen overnight, I can promise you that. These talks are written, rewritten, slide decks are created, uncreated. The whole thing gets chucked and started all over again just because it doesn't feel right. The key message that I'm wanting to give here today, though, is the fact that nothing happens for a speaker's idea unless there is a community involved. And in the TEDx community, there's huge support. I've had 2 coaches. I've had the opportunity to give my talk at 3 or 4 different workshops and different evenings. That happens for every speaker. So what you're seeing up here is not just the speaker and their idea, it's the work of a huge community. That's what I believe the magic of TEDx is that if people are brave enough to stand up and say what they believe in and speak out their truth, and a community supports them, the world can change. I'm hoping that something like that happens today on this stage. The only people who can make that happen is you. Thank you very much.